These are the first 6 problems for the study guide for Algebra B, Quarter 3, Test 1. Let's take a look at what we'll end up seeing on this test. For the third quarter, first test there, we have lots of factoring to do. The first problem on the test is going to ask us to factor a third-degree polynomial. It'll have 4 terms, and we don't see any common factors between these terms, and so what we're going to end up having to do is group. We're going to group the first 2 terms, and we're going to group the last 2 terms. And then from there, what we'll end up doing is we'll look for common factors between these terms. So I see that 7 goes into both 7 and 35. Well, I also have some r's in common. Here I have 3, here I have 2, so I'm going to take out 2 r's from each of the terms. So that's the number that's going to go on the outside of the parentheses, 7r squared. Well, what goes inside is what's left over when I do the reducing. You see how the 7's are gone now. We take out 2 r's from the bottom, take out 2 r's from the top, leaves us with 1 r left over on top. Here 7 goes into the negative 35, negative 5 times. These 2 r's on the bottom cancel out 2 r's on the top. So I'm just left with a minus 5. Over on this other side, I have a common factor of 6. So I'll pull out that 6. It goes on the outside of the parenthesis eventually. Here I have no r in common, so that's it, just that 6. So I'll put a plus 6, and I'm taking out a positive 6. That's what I put on the outside of the parenthesis. And then I do some division. So 6 goes into the 6 one time, left with just that r. 6 goes into 35 times, so I'm left with that minus 5. So from this point, we go ahead and look at the 2 terms that we have. See, here's one term, here's the other term. So what's common between these 2 terms? Well, it's that r minus 5. That's what we have here, another r minus 5. That's the common factor between those 2 terms. And so when we do the reducing and take out that r minus 5, that common binomial, we put that on the outside of a parenthesis, and we see what's left over. What is left over? Well, we've got a 7r squared, and I also have a positive 6. So that's what goes inside the other parentheses, and that is our answer. Well, the next problem here is a trinomial, and so this will factor as 2 binomials, just like that first one did. However, this time we can't factor by grouping. We're just not going to use that method, at least. What we are going to do, though, is we're going to look at this positive sign in front of the last term. And what that tells us is that we have the same sign. Well, if I have the same sign, what that means is that outer terms and inner terms are going to end up adding together. And when I do add them, I end up getting the middle term, which is a positive 13x. And so from that point, we'll go ahead and try different numbers. We can start with the first terms. We know x and x are the only numbers that make x squared. Now I need numbers that multiply to make 30. And so I just think of some different numbers. You know, we've got 3 and 10. You know, we've got 30 and 1. Even have 15 and 2. But we're trying to find the ones that make 13. Well, 5 and 6, you see, if I try those two numbers don't add to make 13. They only add to make 11. So I got to try something different. So 3 and 10, I had mentioned those before. See if they end up working. 3 times 10 does make 30. When I check my outside terms, I get 10x. My inside terms make 3x, and those numbers do add to make 13x, so it does end up working out. So that's the answer that I'll end up boxing, x plus 3 and an x plus 10. And if you had written down the numbers in a reverse order, it would still be the same answer. Well, let's take a look at the next one, a little bit tougher problem. And the reason it makes it tougher, not only is the number, that last digit, a little bit bigger, but we also have opposite signs. So opposite signs are tough because we have to make sure we get the right sign in front of the right number for the last term there. So we'll start with c and c, since those are the only numbers that are going to make that c squared. And now, start thinking of numbers that make 108. And so the numbers that come to my mind are 9 times by 12. Now I know 9 goes into it because if I add the digits 1, 0, and 8, that makes 9. 9 goes into any number whose digits sum to make a number that 9 goes into, that 9 is a factor of. And 108 is one of those numbers. So let's check the outside terms. That makes 12c. The inside makes 9c. those will subtract to make a 3c. Now, in order to make it negative, I need the 12 to be negative because it's the bigger number. 9 is the smaller number. It needs to be positive in order to make a negative 3c. So there it is, c plus 9 and a c minus 12. Well, let's take a look at the next problem. Next one is similar in that we have another minus sign here. And so again, that tells us that we're dealing with opposite signs. See, one will be negative, one will be positive in order for us to multiply to make a negative 56. And as I think about those numbers, I start by drawing the two sets of parentheses, get the x and the x in there, that makes x squared. And the numbers that come to my mind are 8 and 7. Those numbers multiply to make 56. And if I check those outside terms, I get 7x. Inside, I get 8x. Those will subtract to make a 1x. Now, I want them to make a positive 1x. So what that tells me is that 8 needs to be positive. So the 8 will put as positive. And the 7 needs to be negative. 7 is negative. And those numbers will multiply to make negative 56 and subtract to make 1x. So there it is, x plus 8 and an x minus 7. Well, let's take a look at another one. This one's a little tougher because now, on the fifth problem, we start to get an a term. And remember, they go ax squared plus bx plus c is a common way to express a trinomial. And in this case, we have 2 as the coefficient of the x squared term. So as I do it, I need to start with a 2x and an x. Well, I know that, but how about that last term? Well, it's a negative. So just like the last two problems we had, we're going to end up dealing with opposite signs. Well, if we deal with opposite signs, what it means is that they're going to end up subtracting to make negative 1. So the outside-inside terms, the difference, don't know which one's negative. I'll just put a minus sign next to one of them. One of them is going to be negative, one will be positive, so they'll be opposite signs, and we'll end up subtracting and get negative 1x. So let's just try it. Let's try the numbers that multiply to make 1. Don't have a whole lot of options, just 1 and 1. So now from this point, I'm multiplying the outside, make 2x, inside make 1x. I can get those to subtract to make 1x. Now I want a negative 1, so that tells me in order to get this negative, 2 needs to be negative, 1 needs to be positive. So I'll put the plus sign there and the minus sign there. And there it is, 2x plus 1, and I have an x minus 1. So that's what makes these a little bit tougher, is that a little more thought process into checking those outside and inside terms. Same sort of thing on this next one. We have another polynomial, another trinomial with an a term. It's a 3 this time. So as I draw my two parentheses, I'm starting off with 3x and x, because those are the only numbers that multiply to make a 3x squared. Looking at that last term, it's a plus sign, so that tells us that we have the same sign this time. Same sign means that the outside and inside terms are adding together this time to make a positive 5x. So let's take a look at what we can try. Well, we've only got a couple options, but we need to make sure we get them in the right spot. You've got 2 and 1, so that's one option, 2 times 1 this way, or 1 times 2. So we're going to check this 2 times 1 first to see if it works. So let's go ahead and figure that one out. This is 3x, those are the outside terms. Inside, make a 2x. If I add those together like I should, because they're the same sign, I do get a 5x. So in order to make it positive, both signs need to be plus. So there is a 3x plus 2 and an x plus 1. So those are what you'll see as the first 5 problems on this test this week. The last 3 problems we'll go over with part number 2.